Hello and welcome to the Whirly Bloke channel. Today I'm going to be doing a long-term test report on the Vortex 250 Pro from ImmersionRC. I've had my Vortex for about 3 months now, and I thought it'd be useful to do a long-term test report on what I think is good, bad and ugly about it, as well as some tricks and tips I've picked up along the way about FPV flying in general. I've realised this video's got a little bit long, so I've put some links below so you can pick and choose what you actually want to watch. To see my other video about unboxing, building, setup and maiden flight, check out my other video. Let's get started. When you first start out, you're going to crash lots and have heavy landings. Fortunately, the Vortex is incredibly strong. The main arms are 4mm carbon fibre. But even so, I've managed to break one doing a manoeuvre I didn't really have the skills for. I'd highly recommend getting a 3D printed bumper scoot and some landing feet like these. If you don't have a 3D printer, they're available on eBay and various other websites. They will protect your FPV camera, particularly if you decide to upgrade it. The landing feet just stop you scraping the bottom of the Vortex and rounding off the dome head bolts that make them really hard to remove. They aren't expensive and they aren't heavy, so they won't hurt your wallet or your flying. If you're going to print your own, I suggest a 100% infill to make them as strong as possible. I originally bought the Vortex just to have a play with FPV flying, but to be honest, I've got completely addicted. I recently had an aerial photography job and it all seemed a bit pedestrian in comparison. FPV flying is so much more of a sensory rush. My line of sight flying's always been pretty good because I've been doing it for so long with lots of different types of RC models. But my first couple of FPV flights with the Vortex and the Fat Shark goggles were terrible. I couldn't believe how bad it was. It was almost as if my memory muscle had completely forgotten how to fly. I sort of put this down to being unfamiliar with the immersive goggle experience. But after a couple of weeks of flying in horizon mode, I realised my erratic and jerky flying was due to my brain fighting the self-levelling. I won't go into a deep explanation of the different flight modes here, it's covered on lots of other videos. But basically, angle and horizon mode use the gyros and the accelerometers on the flight controller to give you stability. You need to hold the sticks at the desired angle to maintain a nice bank turn. But if you let the sticks go, the quad will return to a level attitude. Whilst this seems pretty natural for line of sight flying to achieve smooth turns and manoeuvres, in first person view it's really weird. It's unnatural. It isn't how real aircraft fly. Acro mode turns off the accelerometers and just uses the gyros and has no self-levelling. This means in a turn you move the stick to get the angle of bank you want and then move it back to the centre position to maintain it. If you don't, it will keep rolling at the rate of bank determined by the stick position you've set. This is why some flight controller software calls Acro mode rate mode. Basically, this is how real aircraft fly, and in FPV it seems totally natural. Once I switched to Acro mode, I felt completely comfortable and flying seemed much easier. So although you may read that Acro is only for those more experienced pilots who are doing all the fancy aerobatic manoeuvres, I suggest you find a big open field, get a friend to spot for you so you know where it's crashed, select Acro mode, take a deep breath and just go for it. Once you start to get the hang of FPV flying in Acro mode, you'll get more adventurous. You'll try some loops and rolls and you're going to crash. But you'll fairly quickly discover that you can't fly a quad inverted with the power on. It'll just hit the ground really fast. So generally, manoeuvres in a quad consist of a quick punch of throttle to get some height, throttle off, do some sort of fancy manoeuvre and then catch it with the throttle. But the problem comes when you review your flight footage and compare it with Mr. Steele and all those guys, and you'll ask yourself, how the hell does he seem to hang upside down for so long and still manoeuvre with zero throttle? That's where air mode comes in. The details of what air mode does is explained in lots of other excellent YouTube videos, but a simple way to look at it is that when the throttle's at 0 and the props and the motors are idling slowly, you start using pitch and roll and their idling behaviour changes to give you more control authority. It basically means you can still manoeuvre when the throttle's off. When flying FPV, again, this just seems more natural and like flying a real aircraft. The latest version of the Vortex flight controller and OSD software allows you to set flight mode to be on permanently. To select air mode on permanently on the Vortex, in the OSD, go to the menu by holding the left stick fully back and to the left, and we're in the Vortex menu. Scroll down to flight control, select flight setup, and at the bottom here you'll see we've got air mode. Just move the stick to the right to select it. Back, 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 and you'll now see that in the top right hand corner I've got selecting the different flight modes: horizon mode, angle mode and acro. You'll notice that air mode is permanently selected on the right hand side. That's great, and it's a really useful feature that ImmersionRC have added. But sometimes I still like to fly in horizon mode, particularly if I'm flying line of sight or I'm coming in for a landing and I've got a very acute camera angle. If you leave air mode on all the time, you'll find that flying in horizon and angle has a very strange feeling when you're actually getting close to the ground. What I prefer to do is turn off air mode in the Vortex flight controller settings and assign air mode to a switch on the transmitter. We could actually set it up so that we can turn it on and off exactly when we want it, but as it turns out, I only want air mode to be on when I'm in Acro. Let's see how we set that up. So here we are in clean flight. We connect to the quad, go to modes. You can see we've got 3 modes added here. We've got the arm switch, which if I move backwards and forwards, we can see it's arming the quad, as you can hear. And my mode switch switches us between angle mode, horizon mode, and when it's fully forward, nothing is selected, and in Vortex flight controller terms that actually selects acro. So what we need to do is make sure that air mode is selected when it's in this configuration. So we add the air mode range. If I move the switch backwards and forwards, there's 3 position switch, but we're only really using 1 position. So that's in the forward mode. Move these sliders up here to capture that position and hit save. And as I move the switch backwards and forwards, you'll see that air mode is only engaged when angle and horizon mode are disengaged, which means that acro is active. I'll hit save again just to make sure, and that's everything set up. By default, the Vortex arms the motors by holding the throttle stick fully down and all the way to the right. To disarm the motors, you hold the throttle stick fully down and all the way to the left. All seems pretty fine. And it's very similar to how the Pixhawk and Mission Planner work that I'm very used to. But one day I decided to go out and try some inverted yaw spins that I'd seen demonstrated on YouTube. This all looked pretty straightforward. Get plenty of height, quick punch of throttle, 180 degree roll to get inverted, and yaw for as long as you feel comfortable and then recover. So I tried a right yaw inverted spin, which worked okay. It was all a bit scruffy. And then, full of confidence, I tried a left yaw inverted spin, which was a bit of a mistake. The motor stopped and the Vortex plummeted to the ground, hitting a wooden fence. As soon as it happened, I realised my rookie error, but didn't have any time to recover. An inverted left yaw spin means 0 throttle, full left yaw, and yes, that disarms the motors. The obvious thing to do is use a transmitter switch to arm and disarm, which turns out is what everybody else does. So, another lesson learned. If you find that the Vortex is misbehaving in horizon and angle mode and not handling as you expect it to, especially after a crash, it may be because the accelerometers need recalibrating. This is very straightforward. Vortex have built this into the OSD menu and flight controller menu. Simply select down and fully left to bring up the Vortex menu. Scroll down to flight control. Scroll down to calibrate accelerometer. Make sure that the quad is actually sitting on a nice level surface. Move the stick to the right. Calibration has started, and now that's complete. So you should actually be back up and flying again. When I first started out, I deliberately chose 3S batteries because I figured it was probably a bit more manageable as a beginner. And I was getting 4 to 5 minutes flight times, which seemed pretty good, but after flying with some friends who have lots of FPV experience, I realised the combination made it underpowered, and it was actually harder to escape those close calls with the ground. And although the Vortex is incredibly strong, it's quite heavy. So actually running on 4-cell packs is pretty good. It's got reasonable power, and it does cope with the weight of the Vortex very well. After I put these on, I felt again more comfortable. And what I'd recommend, if you're going to go down this route, don't bother with these. The 3S packs are very good, and they're a bit cheaper, but I've got several of these sitting on the shelf now, and I don't think I'll be using them. When you get the Vortex, it comes with a couple of sets of these gem fan blades. I broke the first set fairly quickly, and they're very stiff. I bought some replacement gem fans. I'm not sure these are actually gem fans, but they're sort of almost like replicas. Didn't like these at all, and I fairly quickly moved on to using a tri-blade. These seem to be the sweet spot for the Vortex and many other quads between power and drag. Obviously, the more blades you have, the more drag you have. Slightly less flight time with these, but they're incredibly strong. They really are very good. The problem I found with these is, although they don't break very often, what happens is if you hit something hard like a tree, they will tend to crease or bend up. And when that happens, no amount of heat or bending back gets them back into shape, and you end up with horrible flight with really vibraty video, and you just have to chuck them. I've got a few of these. I'm sure you all have got a box full of old props. But anyway, one evening I was out flying with a friend who loaned me a set of HQ props, and I'd seen these advertised. They were about 50% more expensive than Dell props, perhaps a little bit more. But when I tried them, they're actually incredibly good. They've got a very distinctive sound when they're flying. These are the race durable ABS versions, which are, I think, the top end of the HQ prop range in terms of price. As you can see, they're very flexible, bull nose. These are the 5x4.6x3s, come in various colours. I found them to be very good. They stand up to a lot of abuse of hitting things, and they bounce back into shape. It takes a lot of damage to actually cause these to start vibrating. They do eventually break, and I found they tend to break at the root here and just snap off. But they do last a long time, and in terms of the amount of money you spend for the time they last, then these HQ props really are very good. I'm sticking with those. I'd advise you to do the same. So I mount my receiver inside the body of the Vortex. It's an FR Sky X4R S bus which is a bit of a tight fit, but it gets in there. But what you need to do is fathom out where you're going to route the antenna wires. There's a number of ways of doing this. One is to get yourself one of these 3D printed supports that you could put the receiver in and put your antenna wires in, fix them in there. The first time you do an inverted landing somewhere, they just snap off. They're really hopeless. You can also buy lots of these types of things, which are designed to sit on the back. They're very nicely made. You put some antenna tubes in here to hold your antenna wires. Again, these are really vulnerable and they just snap off. I've seen lots of people using the tie wrap mechanism for supporting antenna wires, but I've come up with my own particular way of doing this, which is subtly different. And since I've done it this way, I've never broken or decapitated an antenna wire with a prop. And I'll show you how it goes together. It really is very simple. So this is an old top board which has been broken. So the way this works is we put one tie wrap that way, another tie wrap this way, and you can see already that these form a nice V. Problem is, if they're on the back here, if you crash and bend them that way, they can still get caught by the props and it will take these off. So I've got a couple of antenna wires here and I'll show you how I mount them. What I do is I've got a couple of pieces of heat shrink which you put down there. The antenna wire would have run up through the grommet here. Like that. And the important thing is that the antenna wire is on the inside, the non-prop side of this. I'll pull that down a bit because it's a little bit long. I'll bring that to there. Same on the other side. So this is really no different from what other people are doing. It's slightly awkward because it's no receiver underneath. That's fine. I'll use my heat gun just to there we go. Now this is no different to what a lot of people do, but like I say, the problem is that although the cable wire is running up this side of the cable tie, these can still flop about and they can get caught by the prop. So the quick solution is if I just snip these off short, making sure I don't catch the cable, is to take a shorter piece of heat shrink and push it down over the, so we get a slightly fatter piece, push it down over these two tie wraps, and that brings them together like that. And then the actual exposed aerial part is in this length here. So to give them a nice V, what you can do, I'll probably doing this a bit quickly, making a neater job of this, is to get another tie wrap, make it into a V like that, and push it down there. And then you can take another piece of heat shrink, push it down here, another piece of heat shrink, push it down here. Now, the subtle thing is that the way that the antenna cable is running, it's running up the inside of here, and then it's running between these two tie wraps, so it's completely protected against being hit by anything. There we go. It looks pretty tidy. These could do with a little trim up. It's still flexible, but it doesn't move sideways near the props, which are going to be about here. But you've still got a nice V shape, keeping the two aerial wires separate. That works really well. Very simple. One evening while I was getting the quad ready for the next day's flying, I was changing the props, and as I tightened the prop nut, the spindle just snapped off. It was really annoying because it meant I couldn't fly the next day, but I thought I can just buy a new one of these. No problem at all. Unfortunately, you have to buy a whole motor off ImmersionRC, and I'd already checked these motors and they were fine. They weren't making any nasty noises. It was just the prop spindle that was broken. So I decided I'd just have to buy a new replacement motor. But unfortunately, they were out of stock, which was even more annoying. And it seems that supply of these motors by Immersion was a bit tricky at the time. So I decided to do a motor upgrade, and after lots of research, I chose these Emax 2205 2300 kV red bottoms. They produce just over 1 kilogram of thrust with tri-blade props. As it turns out, they're cheaper than the Immersion motors, and they're really easy to get hold of, which is great. So these motors turned up the next day, and they're all fitted using the original Vortex bolts and these nice motor covers. And once I got all back together, and I used the rotor sense, just by spinning the motors, it calibrates that they're going the right way. I did a quick test using a charged battery, as it turned out a 3S battery, and everything worked fine. So I then went out to the field and tried a proper flight test with a 4S battery, and it was completely unflyable. At first I just assumed that I got the motor running in the wrong direction or a prop on incorrectly, but on closer inspection this motor was really badly stuttering, and on a bit of a hunch I loosened off these bolts, and lo and behold, the stuttering had gone. I realised that actually what was happening was that the bolts that I put in were too long, and they were interfering with the coils on the bottom of the motor. I didn't actually have any bolts of the correct length, so what I decided to do, I've just put a couple of washers between the motor and the arm here, which just raises it up about 1 millimetre, and that's enough to clear the motor from the bottoms of the bolts, and that's all sorted and works fine. So if you're going to do an upgrade, make sure that your bolts aren't too long to so that they go all the way into the motor and touch the the coil windings. My Vortex has taken a fair bashing over the last few months, but it stood up to it really well, I have to say. Apart from the motor supply problems, I found everything else to be easy to get hold of next day. But something that's worth knowing is which bits break and what spares do you need to keep in stock. I upgraded the standard Vortex 2300 kV motors that have this bolt-on spindle that seems to break with some Emax 2300 kV red bottoms. In terms of supply, I don't know what these are like now, but at the time I couldn't get any to replace the one that are broken. Emax red bottoms I can buy anywhere and get next day. So I keep a couple of these as spares on the shelf. The main top plate, this is the old one which I've now replaced. I've had numerous head-on crashes with trees and walls, and there was a stress crack along here. You can see the carbon starting to delaminate. I just replaced that so that it didn't cause a problem in the future, but I don't think this is something you'd need to keep in stock. Yep, after even more head-on impacts, this is the front bumper. Bolts on here. It did eventually break. I tried to fix it a few times. That's been replaced. Again, another very cheap component. Very simple fix. I've actually burnt out one ESC, which is mounted in the between the arm and this plastic cover here. After I landed it, well, more of a crash than a land, in some very long grass, it got wrapped around the motor and stalled it before I had time to disarm the motors. So I got a replacement ESC next day, and just as a precaution I keep a couple of those in stock, but to be honest you probably only need one. After a heavy crash, one of the screw inserts that holds these cap screws got dislodged, and as you turned it, it was just rotating in the plastic. So I decided to replace the arm, and at the same time, rather than just buy one arm, I bought a complete pimp kit. So as you can see, this is quite purple. Very simple to actually get that installed, and it looks pretty good. The cable between the FPV camera here and the board is quite short, and if you're changing the camera or changing the angle, it can quite easily get broken around the connectors where it goes into both the board and to the camera. So I've made up a new lead which is about 50% longer, and I keep a spare one in my bag just in case something breaks whilst I'm out in the field. There's nothing more annoying than being ready to fly but not being able to see where you're going. These silicone dampers that hold the camera mount are actually quite a good design, and the material they use is just right. You don't get very much vibration at all, and they work well because the dampers are in compression. But there is a problem that they mount into carbon, which is pretty abrasive, and after a period of time it can start to cut through the top part of the silicone damper here and split. You can actually just run a file around the edge of these holes where it mounts. It does make a difference, but they do eventually break. I tend to keep a few of these in my spares bag because you never quite know when they're going to go. Also, don't be tempted to fly without these pins and clips. It means when you have a heavy impact, upside down particularly, it stops the whole camera mount jumping off. When you first take the sides of the Vortex to fit the receiver inside or to mount the camera, you'll find there's a sprung steel clip which sits between the two parts of the body, the top and the bottom. It actually serves three important purposes which aren't immediately apparent when you first get the Vortex. The first thing is, acts as a heat sink. The back of the VTX board conducts heat up through the spring clip into the body and stops it overheating. The second thing, it actually grounds the VTX as well to the carbon body. But actually, one of the most important things, it's sprung and it stops this VTX board jumping out of its connector in a heavy impact. I flew without this one day and learnt my lesson. I landed upside down and lost all video. I assumed that because in the crash I'd snapped the antenna off, that actually I'd completely blown the VTX board. Because it took me a while to find the quad, it would have been running without an antenna, which can cause the VTX board to overheat and just fry itself. When I got it home, I actually discovered that the only problem was this board had jumped out of its connectors here. All I need to do is push it back in. So, another lesson learned. Don't forget the spring clip. Video snow. It's part of FPV flying, regardless of your video gear. You expect to get a bit of breakup when you're flying behind buildings or large, wet, leafy trees. But after a while, you learn how to fly through it and don't panic. However, one day, my video was really bad in an open field. It's fine nearby, but after about 20 to 30 meters, it was very snowy. And I managed to put up with it and fly a few battery packs, but it wasn't a lot of fun, I have to say. When I pulled it apart when I got home, it turned out that this VTX BNC connector had just popped off, and it was resting in the connector on the board. So effectively I had no antenna, and it's a testament to the design of the VTX by ImmersionRC that it didn't actually blow up, because it was running like that for probably a good 12 minutes. So if you get snow and you're in an open field, take the side off and check that that connector and the connection underneath to the antenna is nice and firm. As standard, the Vortex comes with Fat Shark Spironet antenna. These work pretty well, but if you crash inverted, which you will, they aren't very crash resistant. Either the cap just pops off and breaks, or you lose it, or you flatten the circularly polarized connections and wire at the top. If you're going to use these, I'd recommend filling them with silicone or hot glue. Popping the cap back on, and then taking a piece of tape and wrapping it tightly round where that split line is on the join. This firms them up a fair bit, and I've used these for quite a long time. You can see these are a little bit battered. I've also tried these AMWay circularly polarized antenna. These are incredibly cheap. They're only about £10 for a pair. They're pretty good. I haven't found them to be they perform as well as the Spironet. Best of all though is the TBS Triumph antenna. These are more expensive. They're about £30 a pair, but quite honestly you get much better performance. You really don't see as much snow on your video feed as you do with either of these. Definitely worth the investment. It's not all hype, they really do work. Highly recommended. Out of the box, the Vortex uses a Fat Shark 700 TVL CMOS camera. This works pretty good, but it doesn't cope too well with fast light changes. If you're flying from bright sunshine into the shadows, it takes a while to readjust its white balance, and that can be pretty unnerving, especially if you're flying fast. But as the manual says, it's very easy to upgrade to a higher spec camera like the ubiquitous Foxeer HS1177. It will fit the mount that clips on the suspended plate, which is good. But the big advantage is this, because it's CCD over CMOS, it's got better light sensitivity, and it's got an OSD, an on-screen display, that allows you to change all the camera settings. I think this is probably why it's so popular, because it's easy to change to cope with various light conditions. The downside is it's more expensive. It's used by almost everyone at the moment, so I actually went ahead and bought one. To be honest, I was actually pretty disappointed. I tried all the default settings, I've tried copying other people's settings, and I've tried setting up my own. But whatever I had on the OSD, I found the images were oversaturated and lacked punch. Then I discovered these Eachine 1000 TVL CCD cameras from Banggood. They're £9. They're incredibly cheap. You have to wait a few weeks for them to turn up. But I've been using these on my Vortex and some other builds for a little while now, and I'm really happy with it. Okay, you haven't got an OSD to set it up, but it's straight out the box. I think it's incredible for the money. So if you're going to splash out on a camera to upgrade from the standard one, I'd recommend trying one of these first. £9 is hardly anything. Again, highly recommended. The GoPro camera mount that's supplied with the Vortex is terrible. It really is the worst feature of the Vortex, and it just feels like it's a cheap afterthought. It's got a few problems. You can see this one's actually, I've managed to break this one. When you've got the GoPro mounted on here with a strap around the top, there's nothing to stop it moving sideways, and it easily, in a crash, moves across and gets mashed by the props. It's pretty bad. The other problem is the angle is fixed, and certainly as a novice flyer, this angle is way too high, and your video footage is just going to show pretty much the sky. Obviously, as you get more experience and you're flying at a more acute angle, then this works okay. Also, if you're using a camera that's got a display on the back, this Yami doesn't, but I have an Elephone Explorer which does, and is now broken. If you have a hard landing, it can actually break the screen. It's just too hard, even with this this piece of neoprene that's actually fixed on there. What it really needs is a mount like the TBS Vendetta has, which is it's like a small plastic foam mount, nice and simple, keeps the camera in place. There are some nice 3D printed mounts available from BlackBoxRC that I've used for GoPros and the Yami, but at the moment I'm using the Runcam HD2, which is smaller, very easy to mount, keeps out of the way of the props. Jury's still out on this. It had a few focus problems, but at the moment it seems to be holding up pretty well. And you can have this set to 1080p at 60 frames a second, which is all you really need for a racing quad like this. I've added a couple of ultra bright white LEDs in the arms here. They're simply pushed through a small hole that I made and wired back through here and powered off the 5-volt GoPro connector. There is 150 ohm resistor in there just to make sure that we don't burn the LEDs out. I find these really useful just from an orientation point of view. If you decide to take the goggles off to do a line of sight landing, as soon as you flip the goggles up, you can immediately see where you are. I think they look pretty cool too. Very simple fix, and I think it looks quite neat. After each flight, all you need to do is clean off any dirt, have a good look round, check for any broken parts or any stress cracks that are in the frame. If you've got an airline or an air duster, you can blow all the dust and leaves and grass out of here, which is fairly easy. Bits of grass tend to find their way through the cooling slots in these motors. It's also a good idea just to, without the props on, give the motors a quick spin. Make sure there's no nasty noises. You can get bits of dirt down between the magnet and the coils. Also, make sure that the motors spin nice and freely, and they should all sound the same. Then, just as a precautionary thing, just go around and check that all the bolts are done up. Just nip them up. Particularly check the bolts holding the motors on. They'll be thread locked on, or they should have been thread locked on when you put this together, but worth checking that they are correct. Whilst we're on the subject of checking the bolts, these small screws, cap head screws that hold on the body sides, don't do them up too tight. They're only going into soft plastic and they will strip. You only need to nip those up a small amount. And while you're at it, it's worth getting a supply of cap head nuts and bolts. You can buy sets of these very cheaply. You can find on high impact that the arms will twist and they will bend these bolts. If you get a bent bolt, take it out, throw it away and just replace it with one of these. A box of these will cost you practically nothing. That just about wraps things up. I hope you found it useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.